All right, today we're going to be drawing a baby deer, and I decided to do with a side pose because they're a little bit easier to draw for whenever you're first learning. Definitely feel free to tackle a frontal view if you would like. So the first thing that I see for the baby deer is I'm going to start with the body shape as usual. So I see that the body shape is kind of like a slight frown on the top because their barks are a little bit arched, and then we have kind of like a little curve shape going around here. So it's basically kind of essentially an oval. You can also start with a rectangle if you wanted to. So I'm going to start with somewhat of a rectangle like this. And then I'm also going to add a slight curve to the edges. So you can choose to do either one. So I'm just going to start with a rectangle just so I get my shape in there. And I'm just going to kind of round off some of these edges by taking the points. Like if you have a rectangle, you have a point, just kind of round off the edges and then get rid of the corners. But yeah, so here I have my rounded off corners. And I have my good body shape that I want to start with. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do the head shape. So I see that if this is the body, the head is kind of cattywampus or off to the side on the corner on the top part right here. So I'm going to go off to the side here, and then somewhere above the body, I'm going to start with just a circle shape. So the deer's head, you don't want to make it too big or too small. Make sure that if you are using a reference picture, you can always measure it to make sure it's not too big or small. All right, so now something that I can do for the head is I'm going to do a very subtle, if this is the circle, I'm going to do a subtle diagonal line from the top. So I'm going to take the top of the circle, I'm going to do a very subtle diagonal line like this. And then the front of the mouth makes also a slight diagonal line, and then it's going to go flat back into the head. So if this is the bottom of the head, what can help is if you start with a flat line, and then whenever you get close to approaching this, you can do a slight curve up in order to make contact. Now, if that feels too long or too short, erase it, move it out, adjust it until you're satisfied with the shape of the head. All right, so something I see here is we have the brow indent. So in the place where the circle meets the muzzle, there should be like a little bump right here. So in this location right here, I'm going to go from the top of the circle like this, and then right there above the muzzle, I'm going to go down so that we can see a level change or a drop in the brow area. All right, another thing that I want to do, something that's really convenient about most animals, is that the place where the brow bone is, if you drew a little smiley face, it's going to line up with both the ear and the eye. So I'm just going to very lightly draw a smile. That way I know where I'm going to put my ear and my eye, and that helps out later. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do my eye here. So the eye is slightly closed. It's kind of like maybe like sleepy or something, I don't know, or just being cute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a slight, very subtle frown right there on that line, pretty close to here, but not touching it, obviously. I'm going to do a very, very subtle frown like this. And if you want it more open, you can make that frown a little higher if you want to. That's up to you. And then the bottom of the eye is just a subtle smile. So I'm just going to start at the corner of the frown, drop it down just a tiny, tiny bit, and then bring it up into the corner. So you're kind of making like an almond-y shape. Now, I usually like, whenever I'm drawing animals, I usually like to leave like a little white dot for a highlight. You don't have to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and fill in the eye just so that it makes a little bit more sense. All right. So now that I have the eye shape, if you are going for detailed, feel free to draw the shapes around the eyes. I'm just going to keep mine simple at first. All right. So for the nose, something that's really convenient about this particular deer species is that the nose is all black or blacked out, and then we have the mouth line, and there's also a little black stripe down here. So what I would suggest is go ahead and draw the shapes around it and then just fill it in so you don't have to worry about drawing like nostrils and stuff. Now, obviously, if you're using a reference that's visible, there is very hard to see because it's very blurry and pixelated, but there is like a little parenthesis shape that you can do for the nostril. So if you wanted to, you can draw like a little parenthesis shape for the shape of the nostril, but because it gets blacked out, I usually don't bother drawing it when I'm drawing deer. But what I will draw first, though, is about a third from the bottom. I'm going to draw a very, very tiny smile. They don't have really long mouths, so their mouths are usually relatively short. So don't draw it like all the way to the jaw like you would with a carnivore, because this is a plant eater, so herbivore, yeah. So you don't want to draw it super long. And then another thing they have is, it's a little hard to see because he has a leaf in his mouth, but they have a little chin bump, kind of like horses do. So I'm going to start right there on the mouth line. I'm going to add a very tiny bump by adding a parenthesis to the bottom of the chin. And then I'm just going to connect that all the way back until it gets to the bottom of the head. So here's kind of the shape of the face. And then what I can do to make this feel more deer-like and less like a horse or a llama is I'm just going to shade in the tip of the nose just by filling it all the way until I get to the mouth line. And then as soon as I hit the mouth line, I'm going to go over just slightly and then shade a little line going down. Different deer species will look a little different, but this one I think is a white-tailed deer, maybe. But this is something pretty distinctive of the deer that I live in, or the deer that are in the area that I live in. So just kind of black out the tip of the nose until you touch the mouth line, And then just below the mouth line, you're going to shade just a little bitty piece in order to get that look of the deer, because that's very distinctive of these kinds. All right, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the ear. So we already have a marker where we're going to be putting the ear. So I'm going to start on that line, and then I'm just going to do a big parenthesis going up like this in order to get the shape of the ear. So I'm going to start here, do a really big parenthesis, kind of tilt it forward a little bit, tilt it forward. And then once you get to the top of the ear, kind of like make it go straight almost like this. So it's kind of like a big parenthesis, and then you do like a slight diagonal line right there to get that shape. All right, so now if you want to make it realistic, do kind of like a wiggly line down. If you're going for more cartoony, feel free to do a smooth line down. But what you want to do is you're going to cap it with a very tiny frown to make it round. And then you're just going to drop it down. So I'm going to add a slight wiggle, but you don't have to, until it gets just a tiny bit past the top of the head. Very important that you don't stop on the top of the head because we're seeing side view. All right, once I've gotten it past the top of the head, I can see the ear is folded. So I'm going to draw that little fold shape. So it makes this back of the ear kind of like a teardrop almost. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to do a round, like a little smile. I'm going to bring that smile all the way to the top, like this. That way, this is the inside of the ear right here, and this is the outside of the ear. And that helps make that shape more distinctive. All right, now in this particular picture, I do see the other ear. It kind of like almost starts like where the other one left off. And I'm going to do a diagonal line, and then just kind of like a line going down that kind of hooks into a J where it curves into the forehead. So starting here, I'm going to start with a diagonal line. It's okay if it's not perfectly straight. It's actually probably better if it's not perfectly straight. I'm going to make it go until it's almost as tall as this previous ear. And then whenever I think it's tall enough, I'm just going to do a slight curve at the top so it's not super pointy. And then just going to bring it back down. I'm going to start with just a simple diagonal-ish line. And then whenever I get close to the forehead, I want to curve it like this, almost like I'm drawing like the bottom of the letter J. All right, so now that I have my curve for my back ear, I do see that I can see this little wiggly line that makes up the fold of the ear. So I'm going to do is I'm just about halfway in here. I'm just going to do like a little parenthesis going down. And if you want to shade in the inside of the ear, you can. If you're planning on coloring it, of course, you can do that as well. All right, so now that I have the deer's face, if you want to, you can also erase the guidelines as you go, so I don't need the eye line or the inside of the circle. Do keep this bottom half of the circle, though, because we still need that for drawing the neck. All right, so now that my face is done, I can go ahead and move on to the other parts of the body. So I see that the back of the ear is connected to the spine. It's kind of like a subtle parenthesis until it touches the spine, and then it changes into a smile here. So I'm going to start at the back of the ear. I'm going to first start off by dropping it down in kind of a parenthesis, and then once I get close to touching the back, I'm then going to just switch it to a smile. So slight parenthesis, switch to a smile, okay? All right, once you get done with that part, then I'm going to do the same thing to the neck area. I do see that the neck is just like a really elaborate parenthesis that goes all the way down until it touches the shoulder. So notice the location where it starts. If you go directly from the center of the eye down, that's where you're going to have your neck starting. So I'm going to go from the center of my eye down. So I see that right here is where I want to start, that parenthesis. I want to go until I get to the shoulder area, which is right here. Just like that. All right, so now that I have my head and my neck drawn, which of course, if you want to add details, you can still add some details like the wrinkles and stuff, but that's entirely up to you. How detailed do you want to go for it? So now that I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and move on to my legs. So I'm going to focus on my front legs first. So I see that this right here is already the shoulder. If you have a flat line here and you need to have a round line, go ahead and increase this so that it's more of a parenthesis. So if you only have a flat line, you didn't do the ovally shape, go ahead and do a little parenthesis right here. And then what you're going to do is once you get a little bit past the body, so allow that parenthesis to drop just a tiny bit past the body, then what we're going to do is we're just going to draw a straight line down, however long you're wanting the legs. Now in this particular picture, they're covered in grass. So it's something easy that I can do is I can just do like this by drawing a bunch of like Z lines in order to make it look like grass is covering the feet. But if you are wanting to see the feet, erase. I actually don't know what deer feet look like. All right, we're going to cap it off with just a simple line for now. So usually, by the way, if you're looking at mammals, most mammals, the length of their legs is going to be the length of their body. So if you take this measurement from the top of from the front of their torso to the back of their body, and then you just turn it, starting at the shoulder going down, that'll tell you how long the leg's going to be. So if I measure this distance, and then I turn it, my foot's going to end somewhere in about this area. So I'm just going to cap it off with a little flat line, and then I'm just going to bring it back up. So this is going to tell me that about here is how long I'm going to make this baby deer's legs. All right, so I see that it makes a very thin line coming up, and then once it gets a tiny bit past the body, it's going to make a diagonal line. So very, very thin, coming back up until it gets a tiny bit past the body, and then I'm just going to do a very subtle diagonal line like this in order to get that length of the leg. In which we're going to come back to this. If you want to just cover it with grass, just do like the little zigzag line. But I'm gonna have to look at a reference to see how to do this other foot. So we'll come back to it. All right. So I still have my body. If you want to have an extra detail, the shoulder does create a lump up here, and then you have the back of the body, but that's kind of up to you if you want to do that. All right. But before I move on to that, I'm going to go ahead and do the, I was about to say the thigh. So I want to extend the back a little bit, and I'm going to draw a really big oval that goes a tiny bit past the body. So I'm going to start on the spine. I'm just going to go up a little bit higher, and then I'm going to do a really big oval that goes slightly below where my body is. And I'm going to stop about a little over halfway into the body like this. So you can exaggerate that a little more. If you feel like the waist, like from the elbow to like the hip is too wide, you can scoot that in further, or if it's too small, scoot this out further. So that's up to you. Look at your picture and determine what you need to do, okay? All right, so now that I have the back of the deer shape drawn, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start on this line that I stopped here. I'm going to actually just increase it by continuing it until I get about halfway the distance between the body and the ground. So that's why my little line here is drawn. And then once I get about halfway there, then I'm just going to drop it down straight, okay? And then for now, I'm just going to cap it with a flat line. I'll have to go back and look at the feet later. All right, now that I have that curve of the back leg, I'm going to go ahead and do the curve of the back of the body, and then it's going to just mimic the same line that we did before. So I feel like its butt's too flat, so I'm going to make mine a little bit more rounded. So I'm going to just do a little bit more of a rounded shape here. You don't have to change it if yours looked fine. I just wanted to change mine because I made a mistake, and that happens sometimes. All right, so now that I have the little frown for the back of the body, or the little parenthesis, now what I'm going to do is whenever I get close to the leg, because notice it's pretty thin, I'm just going to change to a parenthesis like this until it gets kind of diagonal from this line. And then once I get to where it's pretty close to where I want it to be, then I'm just going to drop it down straight. And then you can drop it down either into the grass, or in a minute I'm going to show you feet. All right, so now that I have that, then I can erase this guideline on the inside. So I'm left with just a simple leg shape. All right, now I do see the other legs back here. The baby deer looks like it's in mid-step. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to see where it looks like this leg is coming from. It makes a very slight diagonal line until it gets about halfway, and then it makes a slightly more diagonal line because it's stepping forward. And then once again, it's just kind of lost in the grass, so I wouldn't have to worry about drawing the other part. And of course, you just come back with a parallel. It does get a little wider up here. So notice that I kept this parallel, but then this one I made it a little bit wider as I get closer to the body. All right, now the other leg is very hard to see where it's coming from. Here you can kind of see the back of the thigh, and then you can see the leg kind of just making a slight curve coming down. So I'm just gonna draw a very subtle thigh like this. So it's just a tiny gap. And then I'm just going to continue it on this side. So I'm gonna start kind of like in between the belly and the ankle. I'm just gonna start somewhere in the middle. I'm just gonna do a slight, very subtly parenthesis curve going down to the ground. And then on the back though, I'm just gonna draw a diagonal line. The reason is because that's where it just looks as though it has that curve appearance because of the way that the leg is being bent. And of course, you can draw grass if you want to, if you don't want to bother with feet. I'll show you feet in a minute. All right, so last thing I'm going to do on this deer right here before the toes and stuff is we're going to do the tail. So you can have the tail down or you can have the tail up. This one in particular has it down, so I'm just going to start at the back of the spine. I'm just going to increase it by making it go a little further out. I'm going to go ahead and add a little fluffy texture, just to really let me know that that was the tail and not just an extra leg thing back there. All right, and then afterwards you can erase the top of the tail line up here so that you just have the thigh stopping before it touches the top of the body. So now I have this pretty decent deer shape. Obviously you can add more details, you can take away some details. It's up to you how you're going to plan on doing your drawing. But let me really quickly Google some pictures of deer feet. Okay, I found some. They're not baby deer feet, but they'll work. All right, so they do have knobby knees. If you want to add knobby knees, all you have to do is just do like a slight increase where you create a very, very, very subtle bump. They don't have like really big knobs, but just kind of like in the middle-ish of the legs. If you want to create like a little bit of a knob effect and do like little parentheses like this, you can do that for extra detail. Not necessary though if you don't want to. If you're doing more of a cartoony style, totally don't need to do that. And they don't really have knobby knees in the back, but they do have these like weird ankle sinew looking things in the back. If you want to add that detail, you definitely can. So it's up to you how detailed you want to go for it. I'm just going to add one knob on the bottom. I don't want to add too much detail. All right, so for the feet, if you're doing those, let me erase the grass line. If you decide that you want to do those instead of putting grass at the bottom, if I look at the shape of these deer feet, they have kind of like, I'm going to look at this one right here for the one that's down. It goes at a very, very subtle diagonal line where the toes are going to be. and there is actually 2 toes here, so I'm going to do a slight split, and then I'm going to do a very subtle diagonal line to where there's like a third toe. Is it a toe? A hoof? Whatever. All right, so there's a third thing that kind of sticks out like a little triangle prong. I'm just going to fill them in black just so that I know that that's what they were, was the little feetsy things. And there is a slight bump on the front where it gets even thinner next to it. So if you want to add like a little bit of a bump, you can, in order to give it a little bit more slenderness to it. But that's kind of up to you. So essentially, it's if this is the leg coming down, you get a little bit of a bump, and then you got like 2 toes that are coming down from that bump. And then you have it to where you have like a little pronged foot that's coming up, so you can just kind of like shade in these things. Essentially, I mean, obviously it's a little bit different, but like that's kind of sort of what you're going for whenever you're seeing the deer's foot. All right, so looking at this one now, I see that this foot is slightly raised, so I'm going to go ahead and mimic this one. So I'm going to do a slight diagonal line. All right, a little bit higher up. Slight diagonal line where I see like 2 toes. I'm going to add that little bump and the little black spot on the back of the foot, and then just bring it up, shade it in, so I get the look of a foot. And you don't have to do that sophisticated. You can just literally do, just like if this is the leg, draw like triangle, circle, go up, shade it in. It doesn't have to be super detailed, or if it's lifted like the one that I just did, diagonal line, triangle, space, black dot, and then continue. So, oh, you didn't see that, sorry. But you can do something kind of like this if you want to. It doesn't have to be super detailed. All right, so now for, we're gonna mimic these back legs over here. Oh, I want to see a picture. Okay, so I'm just gonna do the same thing I did before. So just slight bump, diagonal line, kind of an increase, and then a little black dot on the top, shade it in. There's my back foot. I'm just going to do the same thing for this back foot. So slight diagonal line, 2 toes, a bump, a little black dot. And there we go. So now I have my little deer with these little toesies and stuff. Okay, so now I'm back to this picture, which definitely feel free to change things and make it more kind of like your own deer character thing or whatever it is that you're drawing. I'm going to add a few more details, and I'm going to erase a few more lines. If you want to draw yours a little bit more cartoony, definitely feel free to exaggerate some of these features. Make the head a little bigger, the eyes a little bigger, make the legs a little thicker. It's entirely up to you what you want to do. But now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back through and add some details. So I see that there's some like wrinkles in the neck area. There's some like wrinkles and shapes around the eye. So I'm just going to draw some of those little smaller features that I'm seeing, just because I think that would kind of help add to the overall feel of the animal. So what I'm doing is I'm just looking for anywhere that we have like different changes in like either shading or in like textures. So I'm just going to go back through and add some textures to some of these fluffier areas, just by adding some like slightly zigzag lines, which all these things, by the way, are like totally optional. You don't have to add these. These are just things that I personally wanted to add because I like making, I don't know, cute things. All right, so now something that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of shading. You don't have to shade if you don't want to. I'm going to be very careful not to shade the parts that are more of a white color, because I want to really make this deer stand out in the markings and stuff. So I see that these areas are a little bit darker. So are these areas, and I see that it's covered in white spots. By the way, something that you can do kind of makes it a little easier is if you do have a lot of white things, but you have it like mostly dark with only white spots, go ahead and shade in the majority of it like this, wherever it is that it's going to be mostly darker. Don't be worried about it if you get out of your lines. As long as you're doing it light enough, you can always go back through and kind of like erase the mistakes and stuff. So I made my face a little too dark, so I'm going to lighten that up a little bit with my eraser, just by lightly erasing. All right, so to add spots, you can just go back through with an eraser and just like literally erase spots on there if you want to. If that's not working for you, you can also just go back through and like pseudo draw them. So just draw like little spots. That'll give you kind of like the illusion that you had spots on there. So using either your eraser, pencil, combination of all of them, just add a few little funny spots. And there we have a little deer. Of course, you can add more detail, you can erase more things, add more shading, but that's entirely up to you how much you want to go into it. I didn't want to go too far into it because I just want to keep this one a little bit more simple. So yeah. I decided to go ahead and like add a little bit more shading to it. So you can see I'm just kind of roughing up some more darker shadows. That way I could show you guys an example of how to use the eraser technique. So I'm just going through and I'm kind of buffing up some more shading. I'm also going to use a technique called the smudging. So I would suggest smudging with a paper towel. I'm just using a finger just because I'm not worried about this sketch too much. So after I smudged it, then I went back through with an eraser. All right, so that finishes that up. Feel free to add more stuff to it. And if you need any help, always feel free to email me anytime. I'd be more than happy to respond whenever I can. So, but yeah, so that concludes the deer. I hope you had fun. Best of luck, and keep hanging in there.